The night was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses on your ears and makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. Somewhere deep in the Appalachian woods, far from the glow of city lights, a solitary cabin sat nestled among the towering pines. Its wooden walls creaked softly in the cool evening breeze, but no one inside paid much attention. For the family living there, this was just another night until it wasn't. The first sign that something was wrong came with the animals. The dog, usually a fearless guardian of the property, whimpered and cowered under the porch, tail tucked firmly between its legs. The chickens in their coop flapped and squawked in panic, as if an unseen predator lurked nearby. The forest, once alive with the chirps of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl, had gone completely silent. And then came the light. It started as a faint glow on the horizon, a soft bluish white that could have been mistaken for moonlight. But it grew brighter, sharper, and more unnatural with every passing second. Soon, it illuminated the entire clearing around the cabin, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to dance and writhe on their own. The air grew heavy, charged with an electric hum that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Inside the cabin, the family stared at each other, wide-eyed and frozen, as the light seeped through the cracks in the wooden walls. The father was the first to move. He grabbed the shotgun that leaned against the fireplace, his hands trembling but determined. His wife clutched their daughter tightly, whispering soothing words that did little to hide the fear in her voice. The child, no older than 10, clung to her mother, her wide eyes reflecting the growing light outside. Whatever was happening, it was clear that none of them had any idea how to handle it. And then the light shifted. It wasn't just illuminating the forest anymore. It was moving, alive, and deliberate. Beams of it shot through the trees, scanning the ground like searchlights. The hum grew louder, more insistent, vibrating through the walls and into their very bones. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light vanished. For a moment, there was only darkness and the sound of their own ragged breathing. The father tightened his grip on the shotgun and stepped toward the door. He peered through the small window, his breath fogging up the glass as he strained to see anything in the inky blackness outside. "Stay here," he whispered, though his voice betrayed his own uncertainty. He opened the door slowly, the hinges creaking loudly in the oppressive silence, and stepped onto the porch. The air outside felt different, colder and heavier, as if the very atmosphere had been altered. The forest remained unnaturally still, the trees standing like silent sentinels under the pale moonlight. But there, in the clearing where the grass had been lush and green just hours before, was a perfect circle of scorched earth. At its center stood a figure. It was humanoid in shape, but that was where the similarities ended. Its skin shimmered with a silvery hue, as though it were made of liquid metal. Its eyes glowed faintly, an unsettling shade of pale blue that seemed to pierce through the darkness. It stood motionless, its elongated limbs hanging at its sides, as if waiting for something. The father's breath caught in his throat. He had grown up hearing stories of strange sightings and unexplained phenomena, but nothing could have prepared him for this. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice trembling but loud enough to echo through the clearing. The figure tilted its head slightly, as if curious about the sound, but made no move to respond. The father took a cautious step forward, the shotgun now raised and ready. "I'm warning you. If you come any closer." Before he could finish the sentence, the figure moved. It wasn't a step or a lunge, but something altogether alien, as though it had simply shifted from one spot to another without crossing the space in between. One moment, it was at the center of the circle, and the next, it was standing at the edge of the porch, mere feet away. The father stumbled backward, nearly dropping the shotgun in his panic. Inside the cabin, the mother and daughter watched in horror through the window. The child whimpered softly, and her mother tightened her grip, her eyes darting between the figure and her husband. She wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but sit there helplessly. But something about the figure, its unblinking gaze, its unnatural stillness kept her rooted in place. And then, without warning, the figure raised one of its elongated arms. A beam of light shot from its hand, not toward the father but into the sky. The beam split the night like a knife, disappearing into the heavens and leaving behind a trail of shimmering particles. Moments later, the hum returned, louder and more intense than before. This time, it was accompanied by a low rumble, like distant thunder, growing closer and closer. The father turned his gaze upward, and his heart sank. Descending from the sky was a massive craft, its surface smooth and mirror-like, reflecting the forest below. It hovered silently above the clearing, its sheer size dwarfing the cabin and everything around it. The hum grew deafening, and the air seemed to vibrate with its presence. And then came the voices. Not spoken words, but a series of thoughts, impressions, and emotions that invaded their minds without warning. The father staggered, clutching his head as an overwhelming sense of curiosity, urgency, and something else flooded his thoughts. Inside the cabin, the mother and daughter experienced the same intrusion, their faces contorted in confusion and fear. The figure on the porch turned its glowing eyes toward the father, its expression, if it could be called that, impossible to read. The voices grew clearer, more focused, forming fragments of sentences that danced on the edge of comprehension. "You are chosen." The words echoed in their minds, each syllable carrying a weight that felt almost unbearable. The father shook his head, trying to clear the fog of alien thoughts. "Chosen for what?" he managed to whisper, though he wasn't sure if the question was directed at the figure or himself. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it extended its other arm, pointing toward the cabin. The mother screamed as the door burst open, the light flooding inside and enveloping her and her daughter. The father lunged forward, desperation overtaking his fear, but he was stopped in his tracks by an invisible force. He could only watch, helpless, as his family was lifted into the air, their forms silhouetted against the blinding light. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, it was over. The light vanished. The craft disappeared into the night sky, and the clearing was plunged back into darkness. The father collapsed to his knees, the shotgun falling from his hands. His mind raced with questions, but one thought overshadowed them all. They were gone. Above him, the stars twinkled innocently, as if nothing had happened. But deep in the woods, a new presence stirred, watching and waiting. This was only the beginning. A strange, almost musical hum filled the chamber as the humans regained their senses. The cool air, thick with an unfamiliar metallic tang, felt heavy in their lungs. The dim lighting, tinged with hues of blue and silver, cast shadows that danced eerily across the sleek, smooth walls. The room or vessel, they presumed, was like nothing they had ever seen. It pulsed faintly, as though alive, the walls subtly expanding and contracting like the breath of a living orgasm. The group's attention shifted to the beings standing before them. They were tall, slender, and radiated an aura of profound intelligence and power. Their large, luminescent eyes seemed to peer straight into the soul, observing, analyzing, understanding. Despite their otherworldly appearance, their expressions weren't hostile. Instead, they were a blend of curiosity and something that could almost be mistaken for empathy. Still, The humans couldn't shake the primal fear coursing through their veins. The youngest among the group, a woman with dark curls and wide, frightened eyes, clutched at her chest, willing her heart to slow down. "Where are we?" she whispered, her voice trembling. But the words felt inadequate, futile, as if language itself was incapable of bridging the chasm between them and these beings. One of the aliens stepped forward. Its movements were fluid, almost hypnotic. It raised a hand long, delicate fingers ending in soft, glowing tips, and a ripple of energy passed through the room. Suddenly, an image appeared in the air, suspended like a hologram. The Earth. It rotated slowly, encased in a faint, shimmering bubble. The implication was clear. The humans were no longer home. Panic flared like wildfire. A man older, his face lined with years of struggle, stepped forward aggressively. "What do you want from us?" he demanded, his voice echoing in the chamber. The others flinched at his tone, but no one stopped him. His question lingered in the air, unanswered. The beings exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Finally, one of them reached out, not with words, but with an emotion that seemed to settle directly into their minds: patience. It wasn't soothing exactly, but it was enough to temper the rising hysteria. The aliens' glowing fingers moved again. This time, they were of humans, but not as they knew themselves. These were images of men and women who seemed enhanced. Their features were sharper, their bodies stronger, their movements impossibly graceful. It was humanity, but different, evolved. The hologram shifted, now showing human DNA strands ordinary at first, then gradually transforming, rearranging, becoming something unrecognizable, yet beautiful. A collective realization began to dawn within the group. Whatever these beings wanted, it wasn't random. It was deliberate, purposeful. They weren't here by chance. They had been chosen. The older man's defiance faltered, replaced by confusion. "You want to change us?" he asked, hesitantly. Again, no verbal response came. Instead, a different alien approached, its presence radiating a calming energy. It held a small, crystalline device in its hand. The object pulsed softly, emitting a gentle hum that resonated in their chests. One by one, they felt something: an invitation, a request to understand. It wasn't forceful, but it was persistent, like a hand extended in cautious trust. The youngest woman stepped forward, hesitantly. She was trembling, but her eyes held a spark of resolve. She reached out and touched the device. Instantly, her mind was flooded with visions. She saw humanity's history, its triumphs and tragedies, its resilience and its flaws. But then the visions shifted. She saw a future unlike anything she could comprehend. Cities gleamed with a brilliance that made her eyes water. People moved with a unity and purpose that seemed otherworldly. But there was something else, something darker. Flashes of conflict, of despair. A catastrophic event. And then silence. She pulled her hand away, gasping. Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to process what she'd seen. The others crowded around her, demanding to know what had happened, what she'd seen. But the words wouldn't come. How could she explain something that defied the limits of her understanding? The aliens remained silent, watching. It wasn't indifference, but rather a patience born from an understanding far beyond human comprehension. They didn't need to explain. The woman's reaction was explanation enough. Slowly, one by one, the others approached the crystalline device. And one by one, they experienced the same flood of visions. Each reacted differently. Some wept. Others stood frozen, their minds racing to make sense of what they'd seen. The older man fell to his knees, his hands trembling. Whatever stubborn resistance he'd felt had been replaced by something else. Fear and awe. When the last human had stepped back, the aliens moved again. The holographic images dissolved, replaced by new ones. These showed the humans themselves. But now, they were surrounded by symbols and patterns, genetic codes, biological diagrams. It was clear what the aliens were conveying. They wanted to merge their knowledge with humanity, to alter their DNA, to prepare them for something. But what? The question lingered, unanswered as the room grew eerily silent. "Why us?" someone finally whispered, breaking the stillness. The aliens exchanged glances once more. This time, they projected something new. It was Earth again, but the shimmering bubble that had encased it was gone. In its place were cracks, fractures spreading like spiderwebs. The image zoomed in, showing the planet's surface. Forests burned. Oceans rose, swallowing cities. The skies were choked with ash and smoke. And then, the final image, Earth, a desolate, lifeless sphere drifting in the void. The meaning was clear. Humanity was on the brink of destruction, whether from its own actions or forces beyond its control. The aliens weren't just intervening. They were responding to a crisis. But the question remained, was this intervention an act of salvation or something more sinister? The group was left reeling. Questions swirled in their minds, unspoken but palpable. Could they trust these beings? Did they even have a choice? And what would this evolution mean for them, for humanity as a whole? The aliens stepped back, their forms fading slightly as the room dimmed. It was as though they were giving the humans space to process, to decide. But the humans couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about choice. It was about survival. And the clock was ticking. In the silence that followed, the woman with dark curls spoke again. Her voice was steadier now, though still laced with uncertainty. "If we don't agree, what happens to us? To Earth?" The aliens didn't respond, but their silence spoke volumes. The images they'd shown were warning enough. The humans looked at one another, their faces etched with a mixture of fear, confusion, and reluctant determination. They had been thrust into a situation beyond their control, but one thing was clear. Whatever lay ahead, they were now part of something far greater than themselves. The chamber pulsed again, the hum growing louder, more insistent. It was a reminder. Time was running out, and the next step, their choice, would shape the future of their species forever. The air inside the facility felt heavy, almost electric, as if the very atmosphere had absorbed the tension of everyone inside. The humans, or rather, the volunteers, sat in uneasy silence, their thoughts racing. No one dared to break the fragile quiet, each lost in their own storm of doubt and determination. They had been briefed, yes, but the details of what was to come remained deliberately vague. All they knew was that they were chosen, hand-picked for reasons they could only guess, to participate in an experiment that would supposedly secure humanity's future. It sounded noble on the surface, but the undercurrent of fear in the room was impossible to ignore. From his position by the reinforced glass wall, a young man stared out at the alien landscape beyond the facility. The sky was a shade of violet he'd never seen before, streaked with ribbons of gold light that moved as if alive. It was breathtaking and unsettling all at once. He shifted his weight, glancing over his shoulder at the others. He didn't know them well, but in a strange way, he felt connected to them. They were all bound by the same impossible choice, to trust the aliens or to resist what seemed inevitable. The aliens, for their part, remained distant yet ever present. Their sleek, almost fluid movements betrayed no emotion, and their luminous eyes seemed to pierce through to the core of whoever they looked at. They communicated through a mix of gestures and an eerie telepathic resonance that left humans disoriented. The lead alien, who had been introduced as something approximating Envoy, had spoken earlier, but its words lingered like an echo rather than a memory. It had assured the volunteers that this experiment was a partnership, an alliance forged for the survival of both species. But even the most optimistic among them couldn't ignore the power imbalance. It was clear who held the reins here. The next phase of the experiment began with little warning. A series of doors slid open, their mechanisms humming softly, and the volunteers were instructed to enter separate chambers. The chambers were small but not claustrophobic, their walls lined with softly glowing panels that pulsed rhythmically. Inside each chamber was a single chair, sleek and metallic, with intricate patterns etched into its surface. The volunteers hesitated, but the aliens made no move to force them. It was a choice, albeit one that didn't feel like much of a choice at all. As he lowered himself into the chair, the young man felt a strange warmth spread through his body. The patterns on the chair began to glow, and he felt a gentle pressure at the edges of his mind. It wasn't intrusive, not yet, but it was there, probing, waiting. He clenched his fists, his mind racing. What were they looking for? Memories? Thoughts? Fears? He tried to calm himself, focusing on his breathing, but the sensation only grew stronger. In another chamber, a woman closed her eyes, trying to block out the sensation. But the harder she fought it, the more persistent it became. Images began to flicker in her mind, not her own memories, but fragments of something else. A planet with towering crystalline structures, a sky filled with twin suns, and a sea that shimmered like liquid silver. She realized, with a start, that she was seeing through the eyes of the aliens, glimpsing their world, their history. It was beautiful, but there was an underlying sadness to it, a sense of loss that she couldn't quite place. The pressure in their minds intensified, and one by one, the volunteers began to hear the voice. It wasn't a voice in the traditional sense, but a resonance that carried meaning directly into their thoughts. "You are stronger than you realize," it said. "Your potential is untapped, your evolution incomplete. Together, we can change that." But not everyone felt the same invitation. For some, the voice was less a guide and more an interrogator. It prodded at their fears, their insecurities, forcing them to confront parts of themselves they'd long buried. One man, an older volunteer with a haunted look in his eyes, shouted aloud, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Get out of my head," he screamed, but the aliens didn't react. To them, this was all part of the process. Meanwhile, in the observation room, the lead scientists and military personnel watched in uneasy silence. They had been assured that the experiment posed no harm, but watching the volunteers squirm and cry out made them question everything. One of the scientists, a woman with dark circles under her eyes and a clipboard clutched tightly in her hands, turned to the alien envoy. "What exactly are you doing to them?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The envoy tilted its head, its luminous eyes flickering. "We are helping them see," it replied, its tone calm yet unyielding. "To evolve, one must first understand." "Understand what?" she pressed. The envoy didn't answer immediately. Instead, it gestured toward the monitors. "They will decide for themselves." Back in the chambers, the young man's resistance began to waver. The pressure in his mind was overwhelming, but he couldn't deny the strange clarity it brought. He saw flashes of his own life, moments he had long forgotten or tried to forget. The time he stood up to a bully in school, the day he held his grandmother's hand as she passed away, the nights he spent staring at the stars, wondering if anyone was out there. It was as if the aliens were piecing together a puzzle, one fragment of his humanity at a time. The woman in the other chamber felt something similar. The images of the alien world faded, replaced by memories of her own struggles and triumphs. She saw herself as a child, building sandcastles on the beach with her siblings. She saw the moment she decided to become a doctor, driven by the desire to help others. She saw the heartbreak of losing her father, the joy of holding her niece for the first time. It was as if the aliens were trying to understand what made humans who they were. But not all the volunteers experienced such introspection. For some, the process dredged up their darkest fears. One man found himself reliving the moment he almost drowned as a child, the water closing in around him, his lungs burning. Another saw the faces of people he'd wronged, their expressions etched with pain and betrayal. It was as if the aliens were testing their limits, pushing them to the brink to see what they were capable of enduring. The tension in the facility reached a breaking point when one of the volunteers began convulsing. The alarms blared, and the humans in the observation room erupted into chaos. The envoy raised a hand, and the alarms ceased instantly. "The process is not without risk," it said, its voice cutting through the panic. "But the rewards are worth it." "What rewards?" the lead scientist demanded. "You're tearing them apart." The envoy's eyes glowed brighter, and for the first time, its calm demeanor showed a hint of urgency. "If we fail, it is not just your species that will perish." The scientist froze, her mind racing. What did the envoy mean? What stakes were they really playing for? She turned back to the monitors, watching as the volunteers continued to struggle, each of them caught in a battle they didn't fully understand. In his chamber, the young man clenched his fists, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The images in his mind blurred together, a chaotic swirl of memories and emotions. But amidst the chaos, one thought stood out, clear and undeniable. He couldn't give up. Whatever this process was, whatever the aliens wanted from him, he had to see it through. Not just for himself, but for everyone who was counting on him. As the pressure in his mind reached its peak, he felt something shift. The warmth from the chair spread through his body, and a strange, otherworldly energy coursed through him. He opened his eyes, and for a brief moment, he saw the world as the aliens did. He saw the interconnected web of life, the delicate balance that held everything together. And he understood, if only for a fleeting second, why the aliens were so desperate to succeed. But before he could process what he'd seen, the vision faded, leaving him gasping for air. The chamber's walls dimmed, and the pressure in his mind receded. He slumped in the chair, his body trembling, but his resolve stronger than ever. Whatever came next, he knew he had to be ready. In the observation room, the envoy turned to the humans, its expression unreadable. "They are beginning to understand," it said softly. "But the true test has yet to come." "Sure." Continuing from the last section, the room was silent, save for the hum of the alien machinery and the faint murmur of the crew's breaths. Each of them stared at the glowing console, now revealing lines of alien text interspersed with holographic images of human DNA strands merging with something foreign. The intricate patterns swirled together like threads in an otherworldly tapestry. The implications of the display were chilling. This wasn't just an experiment. It was a calculated plan, a merging of species. Before anyone could speak, the room's temperature dropped suddenly, causing an icy chill to cut through the air. The lights flickered, casting erratic shadows across the walls. It wasn't the ship's systems. This was something else. A low, guttural sound reverberated through the hull, a sound that felt alive, sentient. Panic surged in Sarah's chest as she instinctively backed toward the door. But before she could move further, the display shifted again, this time revealing a pulsating red symbol, a warning, perhaps. The alien who had initially communicated with them appeared once more, its holographic form towering and flickering erratically. Its expression was difficult to decipher, but the urgency in its gestures was unmistakable. A new set of symbols appeared on the screen, followed by a holographic map of the galaxy. A glowing point, far from Earth, began to blink rapidly. Then, in a twist that none of them anticipated, the alien began to show a second blinking point, this one much closer. It was Earth. "What is this?" Sarah whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her unease. The alien's message, though silent, was clear. Whatever was happening on this ship wasn't isolated. There was more second wave, perhaps, or worse, an active counterpart already on Earth. "No," Jason muttered, staring at the screen. "They've already started." His voice trembled as the realization sank in. This wasn't the first experiment, nor would it be the last. The ship they were on was merely one piece of a much larger puzzle. The machinery around them started to whir louder, the alien language repeating in an urgent tone. Sarah could feel the ship's walls vibrating beneath her fingertips. It was as if the vessel itself was alive, reacting to something unseen. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice rising above the growing noise. But as she turned toward the exit, the door slammed shut, locking them inside. The alien's holographic form changed, now showing images of Earth from orbit. Entire continents were outlined, with glowing marks scattered across key locations. They were cities, major population centers. The crew exchanged horrified glances as the meaning became clear. This was an invasion plan, meticulously crafted and already in motion. "We have to stop this," Jason said, his tone firm. "There's still time. Maybe if we destroy this ship." Before he could finish, a deafening screech filled the room, forcing everyone to cover their ears. The screech wasn't just sound. It felt like it was penetrating their minds, clouding their thoughts. Sarah dropped to her knees, clutching her head as flashes of images poured into her consciousness. She saw fields of humans standing motionless, their eyes glowing faintly. Then she saw something worse, children. The alien hybrids, their features, a chilling blend of human and alien traits, walking amongst the motionless humans, guiding them. When the screech finally subsided, the crew was left trembling, sweat dripping down their faces. It was no longer just about escape. They were witnessing the future if they failed. And it was a future none of them could bear to accept. Then, the second twist hit them like a physical blow. The alien console that had been showing Earth suddenly shifted to display something far closer, a new signal coming from within the ship itself. It wasn't human. It wasn't alien either. The signal pulsed erratically, like a heartbeat, and the alien's holographic form shifted again, now appearing to react in what could only be described as fear. "What's that?" Jason asked, his voice barely audible. Sarah stared at the pulsating signal, her stomach churning. "Whatever it is," she said, her voice shaky, "it's not part of their plan." The ship trembled violently, And for the first time, the alien hologram stepped back, disappearing from the console entirely. The lights dimmed, casting the room in an eerie blue glow. Suddenly, a section of the wall shifted, revealing a hidden compartment. The crew froze, their breath caught in their throats as the compartment opened to reveal a large cylindrical chamber filled with a shimmering, liquid-like substance. Inside the chamber, a form began to take shape. It was humanoid, but its features were impossible to fully discern. Its movements were slow and deliberate, as though waking from a long slumber. Whatever this was, it wasn't one of the aliens. They were as unfamiliar with it as the humans were. The alien machinery around them began to malfunction, sparks flying as the ship seemed to fight against itself. Sarah's heart raced as she watched the figure inside the chamber. Was it a prisoner? A weapon? Or something entirely different? The ship trembled again, this time more violently, as the figure's eyes opened. They glowed with an intense golden light that seemed to pierce through the chamber, through the walls, through them. Then it spoke, not in words, but in their minds. A single, chilling message: you were never meant to see this. The crew's fear turned to sheer terror as the chamber's liquid began to drain, the figure stepping forward. It wasn't human. It wasn't alien. It was something else, entirely something, that even the invaders hadn't anticipated. And as it turned its gaze toward the crew, they realized one horrifying truth. They weren't just caught in the middle of an experiment. They were part of a battle far greater than they could comprehend. The room plunged into darkness, leaving only the glow of the figure's eyes and the sound of their own ragged breaths. Whatever was coming next, there was no turning back. The chamber hissed open, and the figure stepped out, its form still cloaked in the faint shimmer of the substance it had been encased in. Its movements were unnaturally fluid, each step deliberate, as though testing the weight of the ground beneath its feet. The golden glow of its eyes scanned the room, passing over the humans and lingering for a moment on the alien console. Sarah, Jason, and the others were frozen, too terrified to move or speak. This wasn't something they could fight, not with their limited tools and understanding. It was beyond them. The alien hologram reappeared, flickering and distorted. The invaders were clearly trying to regain control of their ship, but whatever this being was, it had already seized command. The lights on the console blinked erratically, alien text scrolling faster than the crew could comprehend. Then the figure raised a hand, and the console's chaotic displays abruptly stilled, the room falling into an eerie silence. In their minds, they heard it again, that same voice as before. You were never meant to be here. But this time, the voice carried a strange weight, almost like regret. Sarah felt her chest tighten. Was it addressing them? The aliens? Or everything that had brought them to this moment? Jason, against every instinct screaming at him to stay still, found his voice. What are you? Why are you here? He asked, his words trembling but defiant. The figure tilted its head, almost as if considering the question. Then it stepped closer, the golden glow of its eyes dimming slightly. Its voice filled their minds once more, not harsh or cruel, but cold and measured. I am the seed of the creators. I am the safeguard they left behind. The words sent chills down Sarah's spine. The creators? She glanced at Jason, who seemed equally perplexed. It wasn't the aliens, they clearly feared this thing. The answer came, as though the figure had read their thoughts. They are not the creators, it said, gesturing to the alien hologram. They are the thieves, the imitators. They sought to corrupt what was never theirs to control. The console flared back to life, now showing a series of images that shifted too quickly to comprehend. But one stood out, a glowing sphere, suspended in a vast dark void. Earth. The figure turned its gaze to the humans, its voice carrying an almost mournful tone. Your kind was meant to grow, to flourish. They interfered. The meaning was clear, and it struck like a blow to the chest. The aliens hadn't just been experimenting, they'd disrupted something ancient, something that had been in place long before humanity's recorded history. The hybrids, the invasion, the experiments, it was all a perversion of a plan that humanity had never even known existed. The ship shuddered violently, sparks flying from the walls as the alien systems fought against the figure's control. The hologram of the alien commander screamed in its native language, its panic evident even without translation. Jason grabbed Sarah's arm. "We have to go now," he whispered urgently, but she couldn't move, her eyes locked on the figure. It turned back to the console, raising both hands. The ship's trembling intensified, and the alien systems began to collapse entirely. Lights dimmed, panels shattered, and the once ominous hum of the engines fell silent. The crew could feel the shift in gravity, the disorienting sensation of the vessel drifting aimlessly. The aliens were powerless now, their plans unraveling before their eyes. Just as Sarah thought this might be the end of it, the figure spoke again. "You must decide," it said, turning to face them fully. "The path forward is no longer mine to shape." "What do you mean?" Jason demanded, his voice filled with a mix of anger and desperation. "What decision?" The figure's golden eyes dimmed further, its presence growing less menacing and more solemn. "The invaders have already sown their seeds. On this ship, on your planet. Their influence will spread, and your kind will either fall or become something new." Sarah's heart raced. This wasn't over. Even with the aliens' plans disrupted, the damage had already been done. She felt a lump rise in her throat as she realized what the figure was implying. It wasn't offering salvation. It was offering a choice. The chamber that had held the figure suddenly lit up again, and a second compartment opened on the opposite side of the room. Inside was a device, sleek and alien in design, its surface glowing faintly with the same golden hue as the figure's eyes. "This ship can be destroyed," it said, gesturing toward the device. "But the cost will be great. You will lose the chance to understand what you might become." Jason stepped forward, his face contorted with confusion and frustration. "What does that mean? What are you asking us to do?" The figure didn't answer directly. Instead, it raised its hand one final time, and the console displayed Earth once more. The glowing marks on the map the alien influence were spreading. Then the image changed, showing what appeared to be a possible future. Cities overrun, humanity enslaved, hybrids walking amongst them. But there was another vision too, one where humans had evolved, their forms altered but their spirits intact, thriving in a strange new world. Crew was paralyzed, each of them grappling with the weight of the decision. Destroy the ship and possibly save Earth from alien corruption, but lose any chance to grow into something greater. Or let the ship remain, risk the invasion spreading further, and trust that humanity could adapt and overcome. Sarah's voice broke the silence. "If we destroy it, will it stop them completely?" she asked, her voice trembling. The figure's response was as cryptic as ever. "It will stop this, but the future is never certain." Jason turned to Sarah, his eyes searching hers for an answer. But how could she choose? How could any of them? The weight of humanity's fate rested on their shoulders, and no matter what they decided, the consequences would echo for generations. As they debated, the ship shuddered again, a final warning that time was running out. The figure stepped back into the shadows, its form fading until only its glowing eyes remained. "Choose," it said, and then it was gone. Sarah's hand hovered over the device, her mind racing. The crew's voices blurred around her, the weight of their arguments crashing together. And just as she made her decision, the screen flashed one final image, a human face, staring back at her with glowing golden eyes, whispering words she couldn't quite hear. In that moment, she realized the truth. The choice wasn't just about humanity's future. It was about its past, too, about what they had always been destined to become. The room seemed to hold its breath as Sarah's hand trembled over the device. The arguments from the crew felt distant now, their voices like whispers lost in a storm. Her mind replayed the images she had seen, the possible futures, the choice laid bare before her. Each option carried risks and consequences too immense to fully comprehend. She closed her eyes, letting the weight of the moment press down on her, grounding her in its gravity. Jason placed a hand on her shoulder, steady but silent. He didn't say a word, but the warmth of his touch reminded her she wasn't alone. Whatever decision she made, they would face it together. With a deep breath, Sarah pressed down on the glowing device, sealing their choice. The ship reacted immediately, a low hum resonating through its walls as the golden energy spread across the room. The alien hologram flickered violently before disappearing entirely, its last anguished cry echoing faintly before being silenced forever. The walls began to pulse with light, the glow intensifying until it felt like the room itself was alive. "It's activating something," one of the crew muttered, their voice trembling. Jason grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her toward the exit. "We need to move. Now." The group scrambled back through the corridors, the ship shaking beneath their feet as systems began to fail. Sparks flew from the walls, the air thick with the scent of burning metal. Sarah stole one last glance behind her as they ran, her heart pounding as she saw the golden energy consuming the ship, erasing everything it touched. They reached the escape pods just as the ship's alarms blared a final, deafening warning. One by one, they climbed into the pods, the mechanisms hissing shut around them. Sarah's pod sealed, her breath shallow as she gripped the controls. Through the small window, she could see the alien vessel beginning to fracture, its once mighty structure collapsing in on itself. The pods launched, hurtling away from the ship as it succumbed to the device's power. For a brief moment, the silence of space surrounded them, broken only by the distant crackle of the ship's destruction. Then, with a blinding flash of light, the alien vessel imploded, the golden energy swallowing it whole. Sarah shielded her eyes, her heart racing. When the light faded, nothing remained but the vast emptiness of space. The ship, the invaders, the threat, they were gone. The escape pods drifted silently for what felt like an eternity before a familiar voice crackled through the comms. "This is Earth Command. We've located your signal. Rescue is on the way." Relief washed over Sarah, but it was tempered by the weight of what they had just done. As the pods were pulled back toward Earth, she couldn't help but wonder what would come next. When they landed, the crew was met with a mixture of relief and confusion. Earth Command debriefed them extensively, their questions probing every detail of the alien ship, the figure, and the decision they had made. But no matter how much Sarah tried to explain, she couldn't fully convey the enormity of what they had experienced. Weeks turned into months, and life on Earth slowly began to adjust. The alien influence that had begun to spread was gone, wiped out along with the ship. But the world wasn't the same. People whispered about what had happened, rumors of humanity's brush with extinction spreading like wildfire. The story of the alien experiment and the choice made in the heart of their vessel became a part of the global consciousness, a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. For Sarah, Jason, and the rest of the crew, the experience left scars both physical and emotional. They returned to their lives, but the memories of that day lingered, shaping who they were and how they saw the world. One evening, Sarah found herself standing on a quiet hill overlooking the city. The stars above seemed brighter than ever, a reminder of the vastness of the universe and the unknown that lay beyond. Jason joined her, his presence a quiet comfort. "Do you think we made the right choice?" he asked softly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Sarah didn't answer right away. The question had haunted her since the moment she pressed the device. Had they truly stopped the invaders? Or had they merely delayed the inevitable? The figure's words echoed in her mind, its cryptic warning about humanity's future still unresolved. "I think we made the only choice we could," she said finally, her voice steady. "And whatever comes next, we'll face it. Together." Jason nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. The two of them stood in silence, the weight of their shared experience heavy but bearable. As the years passed, humanity adapted. Scientists and historians pored over the data recovered from the crew, piecing together the fragments of the aliens' plans and the ancient truths hinted at by the figure. New questions arose about humanity's origins, its purpose, and the path that lay ahead. The world changed, shaped by the knowledge that they were not alone in the universe. And yet, through it all, humanity endured. They rebuilt, they grew, and they looked to the stars, not with fear, but with curiosity and determination. Sarah often thought about the figure and its parting words. It had called itself a safeguard, a remnant of something greater. Whatever its purpose had been, it had left them with a choice, and perhaps that was the point. Humanity's future wasn't something that could be dictated or controlled. It was something they had to shape for themselves. One day, as Sarah walked through the bustling streets of the city, she noticed something unusual. A child was sitting on the steps of a building, sketching on a piece of paper. Curious, she paused to look. The drawing was simple, but unmistakable, a figure with glowing golden eyes standing amidst the stars. Sarah's breath caught, and the child looked up, meeting her gaze with a shy smile. "Do you like it?" they asked. "It's beautiful," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. The child beamed, returning to their drawing as Sarah walked away, her mind racing. She didn't know what it meant, if it meant anything at all. But as she turned a corner and the city stretched out before her, she felt a quiet sense of hope. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was also unwritten, waiting for humanity to claim it. And in that uncertainty, there was strength. The strength to survive, to adapt, and to become something more. For the first time in a long while, Sarah allowed herself to smile. The stars above seemed to shine just a little brighter, their light a reminder that the story wasn't over. It was just beginning.